The silence in the executive boardroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 24 floors above the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, Amara Johnson stood facing the mahogany conference table where 12 of the most powerful people in the city sat frozen in shock. Her dark brown hands trembled, not from fear, but from pure, burning rage that had been building for months. Nicholas Bennett, the 32-year-old billionaire who owned half of Chicago's skyline, had just announced his plan to lay off 800 employees 3 days before Christmas. 800 families who would wake up on Christmas morning with no income, no hope, and no way to provide for their children. "You cannot be serious," Amara said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. Every head in the room turned to look at her, including Nicholas himself, whose steel-gray eyes widened in surprise. Nobody spoke to Nicholas Bennett like that. Nobody dared to question his decisions. He was known throughout the business world as a man who could end careers with a single phone call, who had built his empire by being ruthless and calculating. Board members, politicians, and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies all trembled when they faced him across a conference table. But Amara Johnson, his 26-year-old personal assistant who made $43,000 a year, was about to give him a piece of her mind. "Those are real people with real families," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Maria in accounting has 3 kids and just bought them Christmas presents on layaway. Tom from security is taking care of his disabled wife. Jennifer from marketing is a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep her apartment." Nicholas leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with those cold gray eyes that had intimidated countless business rivals. His perfectly styled dark hair didn't have a strand out of place, and his custom-tailored navy suit probably cost more than Amara made in 6 months. The man who graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath his notice. "Miss Johnson," he said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet, "I believe you're speaking out of turn." "Out of turn?" Amara's voice rose, and she could hear her grandmother's southern accent creeping in, the one she usually tried to hide in professional settings. "Mr. Bennett, you're about to destroy 800 lives because you want to increase your profit margin by 2%. 2% that you'll probably spend on another yacht or vacation home while children go hungry because their parents lost their jobs right before Christmas." The other board members exchanged nervous glances. Thomas Mitchell, the CFO, loosened his tie and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Rebecca Chin, the company lawyer, was frantically taking notes, probably preparing to handle the legal fallout from this unprecedented confrontation. Nicholas stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame imposing even across the large conference room. His jaw was tight, and Amara could see a muscle twitching near his left eye. She had worked for him for 8 months, handling his schedule, managing his correspondence, and watching him make decision after decision that valued profit over people. "These are necessary business decisions," he said, his tone ice cold. "Sentiment has no place in running a successful company." "Sentiment?" Amara stepped closer to the table, her brown eyes blazing with fury. "You call basic human decency sentiment? You call caring about people who have given their best years to this company sentiment?" The room was so quiet that the only sound was the gentle humming of the air conditioning system. 23 floors below, Chicago was bustling with holiday shoppers, families preparing for Christmas, people who had no idea that their livelihoods were being decided in a boardroom high above the city. "Mr. Bennett, you have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. You own properties around the world, cars that cost more than most people's houses, and art that could fund entire charities. But apparently that's not enough. You need to take away Christmas from 800 families just to add a few more zeros to your already obscene bank account." James Parker, the head of security, was standing near the door, his hand hovering near his radio. He was probably deciding whether to call for backup or wait to see if his boss would give him the signal to escort Amara out of the building. Nicholas's face had gone completely pale except for 2 spots of red high on his cheekbones. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, Amara wondered if she had pushed too far. But she couldn't stop now. She had been holding this inside for too long. "You sit in this ivory tower making decisions about people you've never met, people whose names you don't even know. You see them as numbers on a spreadsheet, not as human beings with hopes and dreams and families who depend on them. Are you watching this story unfold and feeling the tension between Amara and Nicholas? What do you think will happen next? Drop a comment below with your predictions, and don't forget to subscribe to see how this confrontation changes both their lives forever. "And the worst part," Amara continued, her voice breaking slightly, "is that you have the power to be better. You could choose to find another way to make cuts somewhere else, to take a smaller profit this quarter. But you won't, because you've never learned that some things are more important than money. The silence that followed was deafening. Nicholas stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his gray eyes unreadable. The board members sat frozen, probably wondering if they were about to witness someone getting fired in the most spectacular way possible. Finally, Nicholas spoke, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow more intimidating than if he had shouted. "Miss Johnson, I think you've said quite enough." But Amara wasn't finished. She had started this and she was going to see it through to the end. "No, Mr. Bennett, I don't think I have. Someone needs to tell you the truth and apparently no one else in this room has the courage to do it. You're not just a businessman, you're a human being and it's time you started acting like one." She turned to look at the board members, all of whom were avoiding eye contact with her. "And the rest of you are just as guilty. You sit here and nod along with whatever he says because you're too afraid to stand up to him. You've forgotten that leadership means taking care of the people who trust you with their livelihoods." When she turned back to Nicholas, she saw something flicker in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Respect? Or maybe just shock that someone had finally had the nerve to tell him exactly what they thought of him. "I may just be your assistant," she said, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin, "but at least I remember what it's like to be human. At least I still care about something other than profit margins and stock prices." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how the most powerful man in Chicago would respond to being dressed down by someone who was supposed to organize his calendar and bring him coffee. Nicholas Bennett had built his empire by never showing weakness, never backing down, and never letting anyone see him as anything less than completely in control. But as he stood there facing Amara Johnson, something shifted in his expression, something that no one in that room had ever seen before. And in that moment, as the clock on the wall ticked toward 5 o'clock on a cold December afternoon, neither of them realized that this confrontation would change both of their lives in ways they never could have imagined. The most feared billionaire in the city was about to learn what it meant to be challenged by someone who had nothing left to lose, and the young woman who had just risked everything was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth, no matter the consequences. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed Amara's outburst. 20 seconds passed. Then 30. The board members sat completely still, like statues carved from expensive marble. Even James Parker, who had seen everything in his 15 years of corporate security, stood frozen by the door. Nicholas Bennett remained motionless, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Amara's face. She could see her own reflection in his pupils, and for the first time since she had started speaking, doubt crept into her mind. What had she done? She had just destroyed her career, her income, her ability to pay for her grandmother's medications. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow to the chest. But she refused to look away. If she was going down, she would go down with dignity. Finally, Nicholas moved. He walked slowly around the conference table, his expensive leather shoes silent on the thick carpet. When he reached the head of the table, he placed both hands flat on the polished wood and leaned forward slightly. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice so quiet that everyone in the room had to strain to hear him. "In 8 years of running this company, no employee has ever spoken to me the way you just did." Amara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Security would escort her out, her belongings would be packed in a box, and she would join the 800 other people looking for work right before Christmas. "I see," she managed to say, proud that her voice didn't shake. Nicholas straightened up and looked around the table at the board members, all of whom were still staring at him with wide eyes. Thomas Mitchell had gone so pale that his face matched his silver hair. Rebecca Chen was gripping her pen so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "The layoffs are cancelled," Nicholas announced. The room erupted. Several board members started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a chaos of protests and questions. Thomas Mitchell jumped to his feet, his face turning red. "Nicholas, we've already calculated the numbers. We need those cuts to maintain our projected profits for the quarter." "Then we'll find the savings somewhere else," Nicholas replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Cancel the layoffs immediately." Rebecca Chen leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Sir, we've already prepared the paperwork. Legal has spent weeks on this." "Then throw it away." Amara stood in the middle of the chaos, completely stunned. This was not what she had expected. She had expected to be fired, to be humiliated, to be made an example of. She had not expected Nicholas Bennett to actually listen to her. "But what about the profit projections?" Thomas demanded. "The shareholders are expecting." Nicholas raised one hand, and the room fell silent immediately. The power he commanded was absolute, even when he had just made a decision that none of them understood. The shareholders will survive with slightly lower profits for 1 quarter. Find the cuts elsewhere. Reduce executive bonuses, postpone the renovation of the executive floor, sell one of the corporate jets. I don't care what you have to do, but those 800 people will keep their jobs. James Parker's radio crackled to life, and he stepped outside to take the call. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Amara could see him talking rapidly into the device, probably reporting the unexpected turn of events to his team. However, Nicholas continued, turning his attention back to Amara, Miss Johnson's behavior was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Here it comes, Amara thought. He's going to fire me anyway. Therefore, effective immediately, Miss Johnson will be reassigned to general administrative duties. She will no longer serve as my personal assistant. The demotion hit her like a slap across the face. General administrative duties meant filing, data entry, answering phones. It meant a significant pay cut that she could not afford, not with her grandmother's medical bills mounting every month. But at least she still had a job. At least 800 other people still had jobs. I understand, Mr. Bennett, she said quietly. The meeting is adjourned, Nicholas announced. I want new budget proposals on my desk by Friday morning. Find a way to make the numbers work without destroying people's lives. The board members began gathering their papers and briefcases, their movements quick and nervous. They filed out of the room in small groups, whispering to each other and shooting curious glances at Amara as they passed. Within minutes, the conference room was empty except for Nicholas and Amara. The afternoon sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. Far below, the city of Chicago continued its daily rhythm, unaware that 800 families had just been given an unexpected Christmas gift. Nicholas loosened his tie and unbuttoned his suit jacket. The first time Amara had ever seen him look anything less than perfectly composed. He walked to the windows and stood with his back to her, looking out at the skyline he owned so much of. Why? He asked without turning around. Why what, sir? Why did you do that? You had to know I could fire you, blacklist you from every decent job in the city. You had to know there would be consequences. Amara considered her answer carefully. She was walking on thin ice now, and one wrong word could still cost her everything. Because someone had to say it, she replied honestly. Those people trust you with their livelihoods. They work hard, they're loyal to the company, and they deserve better than being treated like numbers on a spreadsheet. Nicholas turned around to face her, and she was surprised to see something that looked almost like vulnerability in his expression. And you think I don't know that? You think I don't understand the impact of my decisions? I think you've forgotten, Amara said softly. I think success has insulated you from the real consequences of what it means when 800 people lose their jobs right before Christmas. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. You realize that your new position comes with a 30% pay cut? Amara felt her stomach drop, but she nodded. I understand. And you're willing to accept that? Most people would quit rather than take a demotion like that. I can't afford to quit, Mr. Bennett. I have responsibilities. Something flickered in his eyes at that. Your grandmother. Amara was surprised that he knew about her personal situation, but then again he probably had access to all of his employees' HR files. Yes, sir. She needs her medications and her insurance doesn't cover everything. Nicholas walked back to the table and picked up his briefcase, snapping it shut with precise movements. Report to Human Resources tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. They'll have your new assignment ready. Yes, sir. He headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. Miss Johnson? Yes, Mr. Bennett? That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do in a boardroom. Maybe both, sir. For just a moment, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch as if he might smile. But then his professional mask slipped back into place, and he was once again the cold, distant billionaire who ruled his empire from the 24th floor. Good night, Miss Johnson. Good night, Mr. Bennett. As he left the conference room, Amara sank into one of the leather chairs, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She had just confronted the most powerful man she had ever met, saved 800 jobs, and probably destroyed her own career in the process. But as she sat there watching the sun set over Chicago, she realized something that surprised her. She didn't regret a single word she had said. 23 floors below, the city sparkled with Christmas lights and holiday decorations. Families were heading home from work, looking forward to spending the evening with their loved ones. 800 of those families would wake up tomorrow morning still having jobs, still having hope, still having a chance at a Merry Christmas. And somehow that made everything else worth it. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the boardroom, and Nicholas Bennett found himself thinking about Amara Johnson more than he cared to admit. From his office on the 24th floor, he had a clear view of the general administrative department where she now worked, sitting at a small desk in a sea of cubicles, a far cry from the prestigious office suite where his personal assistant had been stationed. He watched her through the glass walls of his office as she answered phones and processed paperwork with the same quiet efficiency she had brought to managing his schedule. Even demoted and facing a significant pay cut, she maintained her professionalism and dignity. It was something he was not used to seeing. Nicholas had built his empire by surrounding himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear. Board members who nodded along with his decisions, executives who praised his vision, employees who trembled when he walked past their desks. But Amara Johnson had looked him in the eye and told him he was wrong. And the strangest part was that she had been right. His intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Bennett?" The voice belonged to Patricia Wells, his new temporary assistant. She was efficient and experienced, but she lacked something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. "Yes. Your mother is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Nicholas sighed. Eleanor Bennett never needed an appointment to see her son, and she knew it. At 58, she was still a formidable woman who had helped him build his business empire from the ground up after his father's death 15 years earlier. "Send her in." Eleanor swept into his office like a force of nature, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy blue designer suit impeccable as always. She was carrying a tablet and had the look of someone who had been doing research, which was never a good sign. "Hello, darling," she said, kissing his cheek before settling into the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." "Mother, if this is about the Christmas charity gala, I already told you I would attend." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "This isn't about the gala. This is about your little confrontation the other day." Nicholas felt his jaw tighten. "How did you hear about that?" "Darling, I still have friends on the board. Thomas Mitchell called me within an hour of your meeting." She leaned back in her chair and studied him with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "He was quite concerned about your mental state." "My mental state is fine." "Is it? You canceled 800 layoffs because your assistant yelled at you in front of the entire board. That doesn't sound like the calculated businessman I raised." Nicholas stood up and walked to the windows, the same spot where he had stood after Amara's outburst. The memory of her words still stung, but not in the way he had expected. "Those layoffs were unnecessary," he said without turning around. "We can find the savings elsewhere." "Nicholas, turn around and look at me." He obeyed, as he always did when his mother used that particular tone of voice. Eleanor was studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. "I've been watching the security footage from that meeting," she said, holding up her tablet. 3 times actually. "Mother, that young woman stood up to you in a way that no one has since your father died. She told you truths that everyone else in this company is too afraid to say." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "And you listened to her." Nicholas returned to his desk and sat down, suddenly feeling very tired. "What's your point, Mother?" "My point is that Amara Johnson is exactly what you need in your life." The use of Amara's first name surprised him. "You know her name?" Eleanor smiled, the expression both loving and slightly predatory. "Darling, I've spent the last 3 days learning everything there is to know about Miss Johnson. She's quite remarkable." She swiped across her tablet screen and began reading. 26 years old, graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in business administration. She worked her way through college with 3 part-time jobs, including cleaning offices at night. She's been supporting her grandmother since she was 22, after her parents died in a car accident. Nicholas felt something twist in his chest. He had known about the grandmother's medical expenses, but he hadn't known about her parents. "She turned down a position at Goldman Sachs in New York because her grandmother couldn't travel," Eleanor continued. "She's been working here for 8 months and her supervisor reviews are all outstanding. Never late, never absent, highly respected by her colleagues." "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor set down the tablet and fixed him with a look that reminded him of his childhood, when she would catch him in some mischief and make him explain himself. "Because that young woman is the first person in years who has seen past your money and your power and told you exactly what she thought of your behavior. And instead of destroying her for it, you listened." Nicholas was quiet for a moment, remembering the fire in Amara's dark eyes as she had faced him across the boardroom. She was insubordinate and unprofessional. She was honest and brave. Eleanor stood up and walked to the windows, looking down at the administrative department below. Can you see her from here? Against his better judgment, Nicholas joined her at the window. Amara was visible at her desk, talking on the phone while simultaneously typing at her computer. Even from this distance, he could see the focus and dedication she brought to every task. She's wasted down there, Eleanor observed. A woman with her intelligence and education shouldn't be filing paperwork and answering phones. She brought that on herself. Did she? Or did you punish her for telling you something you needed to hear? Before Nicholas could respond, his mother continued. I've been making some inquiries about Miss Johnson's grandmother. Lovely woman, apparently. Retired schoolteacher, raised Amara after her parents died. She has diabetes and heart problems, very expensive to treat. Nicholas turned to look at his mother, recognizing the calculating expression on her face. Eleanor Bennet never did anything without a purpose. What are you planning, mother? Nothing at all, darling. I'm simply observing that Miss Johnson is in a difficult financial situation, and you are in a position to help her. The question is whether you will choose to do so. She would never accept charity. Eleanor's smile was triumphant, as if he had just proved her point. Exactly. She has too much pride to accept something for nothing. But if it were presented as a legitimate business opportunity or a gesture of good faith after her demotion. Nicholas stared down at Amara's desk, watching as she helped a colleague with something on her computer screen. She was laughing at something the other woman said, and the sound somehow carried through the glass walls and several floors to reach his ears. You think I should offer her money? I think you should offer her what she really needs. Security for her grandmother, respect for her abilities, and recognition of her worth as both an employee and a person. Eleanor gathered her purse and tablet, preparing to leave. Your father used to say that the measure of a man isn't how he treats his equals, but how he treats those who have less power than he does. I remember. That young woman has less power than you, Nicholas, but she stood up to you anyway. That takes a special kind of courage. Eleanor kissed his cheek again. Don't waste it. After she left, Nicholas remained at the window watching Amara work. His mother was right, as she usually was. Amara Johnson was wasted in general administration. She was intelligent, principled, and unafraid to speak her mind. In his world of yes men and corporate politics, those qualities were rarer than diamonds. But more than that, she had challenged him to be better. In 3 minutes of righteous anger, she had forced him to confront the kind of man he had become. The question now was what kind of man he wanted to be going forward. As if sensing his gaze, Amara looked up from her desk and their eyes met through the layers of glass that separated them. For just a moment, neither of them moved. Then she looked away, returning to her work with the same quiet dignity she had shown since her demotion. Nicholas made a decision that would have surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He picked up his phone and dialed Human Resources. This is Nicholas Bennet. I need you to arrange a meeting with Amara Johnson. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. And I want a complete report on her grandmother's medical situation on my desk within the hour. As he hung up the phone, Nicholas realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to a conversation with an employee. Amara Johnson had gotten under his skin in a way that no one ever had, and he was beginning to think that might not be such a bad thing. The woman who had yelled at him in front of his entire board was about to discover that sometimes, telling the truth to powerful people had consequences that were better than anyone could have imagined. Amara sat in the small conference room on the 20th floor, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she waited for Nicholas Bennet to arrive. When Human Resources had called to arrange this meeting, they had been vague about the purpose, saying only that Mr. Bennet wanted to discuss her current position with the company. She had spent the sleepless night wondering if this was finally it, if he had decided that keeping her around was too much trouble after all. 3 days of filing reports and answering phones had given her plenty of time to think about her outburst in the boardroom, and she still couldn't quite believe she had actually done it. The door opened and Nicholas walked in carrying a thick manila folder and a cup of coffee. He was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a navy tie, and his dark hair was styled with the same precision she remembered from when she had been his assistant. But there was something different about his expression, something less cold and intimidating than before. Miss Johnson, thank you for coming. Of course, Mr. Bennet. He sat across from her at the small table and opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be several documents and photographs. Amara caught a glimpse of her own employee file among the papers. I've been reviewing your work history with the company, he began, his tone businesslike but not unfriendly. Your performance reviews are consistently excellent. Your former supervisor, Margaret Torres, Describes you as one of the most capable employees she's ever worked with. Amara nodded, not sure where this was going. I've always tried to do my best work. Yes, I can see that. Nicholas pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table between them. It was a picture of her grandmother, Dorothy Johnson, taken at the assisted living facility where she lived. Amara's heart jumped with alarm. Mr. Bennett, why do you have a picture of my grandmother? I had my people look into your personal situation, Miss Johnson. I hope you'll forgive the invasion of privacy, but I needed to understand your circumstances better. Amara felt a flush of anger and embarrassment. My personal life has nothing to do with my job performance. Actually, it has everything to do with it. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Your grandmother is 73 years old, a retired elementary school teacher who raised you after your parents died in a car accident when you were 22. She has type 2 diabetes and congestive heart failure, both of which require expensive ongoing treatment. The clinical recitation of her family's tragedy and struggles made Amara's throat tight with emotion. Why are you telling me things I already know? Because I want to make you an offer. Nicholas reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, which he placed on the table next to the photograph. Amara glanced down and saw an amount that made her gasp. $50,000 made out to her name. What is this? Severance pay. Generous compensation for the demotion you've suffered and the way you've been treated by this company. Amara stared at the check, her mind reeling. $50,000 would cover her grandmother's medical expenses for the next 2 years, maybe longer if she was careful with the money. It would mean no more sleepless nights worrying about unpaid bills, no more choosing between her grandmother's medications and her own grocery money. But she also understood what this was. This was Nicholas Bennett's way of buying her silence, of getting rid of the troublesome employee who had embarrassed him in front of his board. Take the money and disappear, and everyone could pretend that her outburst had never happened. There's a catch, isn't there? She asked quietly. No catch. You can take the money and continue working here in your current position, or you can take it and find employment elsewhere. Either way, the check is yours. Amara looked up at him, searching his face for some sign of his real intentions. His gray eyes were unreadable, giving nothing away. This was a test, she realized. He was testing her principles, her pride, seeing if she would take his money or throw it back in his face. Everyone expected her to refuse, to tell him that her integrity wasn't for sale, to storm out of the room with her head held high. But as she stared at that check, all she could think about was her grandmother's face last week when Amara had told her they might need to switch to a cheaper medication. Dorothy Johnson had smiled and said it was fine, that she understood, but Amara had seen the fear in her eyes. How many times had she lain awake at night doing math in her head, calculating medical bills against her paycheck? How many meals had she skipped to make sure there was enough money for insulin and heart medication? How many dreams had she put on hold because every dollar had to go toward keeping her grandmother alive? Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. I accept, she said simply, reaching for the check. Nicholas's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed expression. Just like that. Just like that. Amara folded the check carefully and placed it in her purse. My grandmother needs her medications, Mr. Bennett. I can't let pride get in the way of her health. Most people would have thrown that check back at me and told me exactly where I could put it. Amara met his gaze steadily. Most people don't have a 73-year-old grandmother whose life depends on expensive medications. Most people have the luxury of principles that don't cost them anything. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, and she could see something shifting in his expression. What she couldn't tell was whether it was disappointment or respect. You're not what I expected, Miss Johnson. What did you expect? Fire. Righteous indignation. A speech about how your integrity isn't for sale. Amara leaned back in her chair, suddenly feeling very tired. Mr. Bennett, 3 days ago I risked my job to tell you what I thought about your decision to lay off 800 people. I did that because it was the right thing to do, even though I knew it might cost me everything. She gestured to the check in her purse. Today you're offering me money that will help me take care of the person I love most in the world. I'm accepting it because it's the practical thing to do, even though I know what you think of me for taking it. And what do I think of you? You think I'm just like everyone else. You think that everyone has a price and you've just found mine. Nicholas closed the folder and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Actually, Miss Johnson, I think you've just proven that you're nothing like everyone else. Before she could ask what he meant, he continued. Most of the people I know would have taken that money and felt guilty about it, or refused it and felt superior about their sacrifice. You took it because it serves a purpose greater than your own pride. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Amara felt something flutter in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. I don't understand. Your grandmother raised you after your parents died, didn't she? Yes. She gave up her retirement, used her savings to put you through college, supported you when you were working 3 jobs and trying to graduate. She sacrificed everything for you. Amara's throat tightened. How did you? Now she's sick and you're returning the favor. You're willing to swallow your pride, accept help from someone you don't particularly like, and do whatever it takes to make sure she gets the care she needs. Nicholas's voice was softer now, almost gentle. That's not greed, Miss Johnson. That's love. The unexpected kindness in his tone caught her completely off guard. For 3 days she had been bracing herself for his revenge, for some cruel punishment that would teach her never to challenge him again. She had not expected understanding. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help more. Mr. Bennett? Your grandmother's medical bills run about $2,500 a month, don't they? That $50,000 will help, but it won't solve the problem permanently. Amara shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I can manage. I'm sure you can. But you shouldn't have to. Nicholas reached into the folder again and pulled out another document. This is a contract for a new position with the company. Senior Administrative Coordinator, reporting directly to me. The salary is $95,000 a year, plus full health benefits that extend to family members. Amara's mouth fell open. $95,000 was more than twice what she had been making as his personal assistant. That's too much. It's exactly what the position is worth. You'll be coordinating community outreach programs, managing charitable initiatives, and serving as a liaison between the executive team and our employee advocacy groups. A position that didn't exist until 5 minutes ago. Nicholas smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. A position that should have existed years ago. We need someone who understands what our employees are going through, someone who can help us make better decisions about the people who work for this company. Amara stared at the contract, hardly believing what she was reading. Why are you doing this? Because 3 days ago you taught me something important. You showed me that I had lost sight of the human cost of my business decisions. This company needs someone who will never let that happen again. And you think I'm that person? I think you're the only person in this building brave enough to tell me when I'm wrong, and smart enough to help me do better. The offer was everything she could have dreamed of and more. Financial security for her grandmother, a position that would actually use her education and skills, the chance to make a real difference in people's lives. It was perfect. Too perfect. What's the real catch? She asked. Nicholas looked genuinely puzzled. There's no catch. Mr. Bennett, nobody offers someone a $95,000 job because they yelled at them in a boardroom. What do you really want from me? For the first time since she had known him, Nicholas Bennett looked uncertain. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly, and Amara realized that he was nervous. I want you to help me be the kind of man my father would have been proud of, he said quietly. I want you to keep me from becoming so focused on profits that I forget about people. I want you to challenge me when I'm wrong and support me when I'm trying to do better. The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. This wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire she had confronted 3 days ago. This was a man who was genuinely trying to change, who recognized that he needed help to become better than he was. And you think I can do that? I think you're the only one who can. Amara looked down at the contract again, reading through the job description and benefits package. It was legitimate, detailed, and clearly designed to address real needs within the company. This wasn't charity disguised as employment, it was a genuine opportunity to make a difference. If I take this position, she said slowly, I need to know that I can speak freely. I need to know that you won't punish me for telling you things you don't want to hear. Miss Johnson, if I wanted someone to tell me only what I want to hear, I would have hired a parrot, not a person. Despite everything, Amara found herself smiling. And my grandmother's medical expenses? Will be covered completely by the health insurance that comes with the position. No more choosing between medications and groceries, no more staying awake at night worrying about bills. It was too good to be true, but as Amara looked across the table at Nicholas Bennett, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Hope. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was asking for her help to become a better person. I accept, she said, extending her hand across the table. Nicholas shook it, his grip warm and firm. Welcome to your new position, Miss Johnson. I look forward to working with you. As they shook hands, Amara felt a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with the job offer and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. For just a moment, their eyes met and held, and she saw past the billionaire facade to the human being underneath. This was going to be either the best decision she had ever made or the most dangerous. But as she thought about her grandmother's relieved smile when she heard the news, Amara decided that some risks were worth taking. 2 weeks into her new position, Amara was beginning to understand why Nicholas Bennett had been making decisions that seemed so disconnected from reality. From her new office on the 22nd floor, she had a bird's-eye view of how the company operated, and what she saw was troubling. Every report that reached Nicholas's desk was filtered through layers of management, each level softening the harsh realities and emphasizing the positive aspects. Bad news was buried in corporate jargon, and the human impact of business decisions was reduced to statistics and percentages. No wonder he had seemed so out of touch with what his employees were actually experiencing. She was reviewing the quarterly employee satisfaction survey when her assistant knocked on her door. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now had an assistant of her own, a cheerful young man named Kevin who handled her scheduling and correspondence. "Miss Johnson? Mr. Bennett would like to see you in his office." Did he say what it was about? Something about the community outreach program proposals. Amara gathered the files she had been working on and took the elevator up 2 floors to the executive level. Patricia Wells, Nicholas's temporary assistant, waved her through to his office with a smile. Nicholas was standing at his windows when she entered, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and there was a stack of reports on his desk that suggested he had been working late again. "You wanted to see me?" He turned around and she noticed that he looked tired. There were dark circles under his gray eyes, and his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. "I've been reading your recommendations for the community outreach programs," he said, gesturing to a thick folder on his desk. "They're very thorough." "Thank you." "And expensive. You're proposing to spend nearly $2 million on programs that have no direct profit potential." Amara had been expecting this conversation. The Employee Child Care Center alone would benefit over 300 families. The continuing education program would help our workers develop new skills and advance their careers. The mental health support services would reduce sick days and improve productivity. All of which sounds wonderful in theory, but the board is going to want to see concrete returns on investment. "Sometimes the return on investment isn't measured in dollars, Mr. Bennett." Nicholas smiled slightly. "I was hoping you'd say that. How do we convince a room full of business people to approve spending that won't show up on the next quarter's profit statement?" Amara set down her files and moved to stand beside him at the windows. The city sparkled below them, millions of lights representing millions of people trying to make their way in the world. "We show them that investing in our employees is the same as investing in the company's future. Happy, healthy, educated workers are more productive, more loyal, and more innovative. Companies with strong employee satisfaction ratings consistently outperform their competitors in the long term. And you have data to support that?" "Pages of it." She opened one of her files and pulled out a chart. "Look at these companies. Google, Microsoft, Salesforce. They all spend heavily on employee benefits and community programs, and they all have some of the highest stock valuations in the world." Nicholas studied the chart and she could see him processing the information. This was the side of him that she was beginning to appreciate. When presented with solid data and logical arguments, he was willing to listen and learn. "What about the startup cost?" $2 million is a significant investment. "We phase it in over 18 months. Start with the child care center, since that has the most immediate impact on working parents. Add the education programs next, then the mental health services. By the time we're fully operational, we'll already be seeing the benefits from the early phases." Nicholas nodded slowly. "That makes sense. What else?" For the next hour they went through every aspect of her proposals. Nicholas asked detailed questions, challenged her assumptions, and pushed her to defend her ideas with concrete evidence. It was the kind of collaborative discussion she had always hoped to have with a supervisor, the kind that made her feel like her education and intelligence were finally being put to good use. "There's one more thing," she said as they finished reviewing the last proposal. "I think you should announce these programs personally to the employees." "Announce them how?" "Town hall meetings. Small groups, maybe 50 people at a time. Give them a chance to ask questions, share their concerns, and feel like they're part of the process." Nicholas looked uncomfortable with the idea. "I'm not good with crowds." "You're good with data and logic. Present the programs the same way you presented them to me. Show them the research, explain the benefits, and let them see that these decisions are based on sound business principles, not just feel-good publicity. And if they ask difficult questions, then you answer them honestly. If you don't know something, say so and promise to find out. These people have been working for you for years, Mr. Bennett. They deserve to hear from you directly, not from some corporate memo. Nicholas was quiet for a moment, considering her suggestion. You'll be there with me? The question surprised her. If you want me to be. I do. These programs were your idea. You should be the one to present them. Together? Together. Something about the way he said it made her heart skip a beat. They had been working closely for 2 weeks now, spending long hours planning and strategizing, and she was beginning to see sides of Nicholas Bennett that she was sure very few people ever witnessed. When he was focused on a problem, he was brilliant and intuitive. When he talked about his father and the company's history, he was passionate and driven. And when he let his guard down, which happened more and more frequently during their late-night planning sessions, he was surprisingly funny and self-deprecating. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Nicholas said, returning to his desk and pulling out another folder. I've been thinking about what you said regarding employee feedback and communication. What about it? I want to establish a formal system for employees to bring concerns directly to executive management. Anonymous suggestion boxes, regular surveys, maybe even a direct hotline to your office. Amara felt a surge of excitement. That's a wonderful idea. Most employees feel like they can't speak up about problems because they're afraid of retaliation. Exactly. And I think you're the perfect person to oversee the program. Employees trust you. They've seen you stand up to me and not only survive but get promoted for it. The reference to their boardroom confrontation made her smile. Word has gotten around about that, hasn't it? You're something of a legend in the break rooms. The woman who yelled at Nicholas Bennett and lived to tell about it. Great. That's exactly the professional reputation I was hoping for. Nicholas laughed, the sound rich and warm. It could be worse. You could be known as the woman who's afraid to speak her mind. Their conversation was interrupted by Kevin's voice over the intercom. Miss Johnson? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a call from your grandmother's doctor. He says it's urgent. Amara felt her blood turn to ice. Transfer it to Mr. Bennett's phone, please. Nicholas gestured for her to use his desk phone while he moved to give her privacy. She picked up the receiver with trembling hands. This is Amara Johnson. Miss Johnson, this is Dr. Peterson at Lakeside Medical Center. I'm calling about your grandmother, Dorothy Johnson. Is she okay? She's stable now, but she had an episode this morning. Her blood sugar dropped dangerously low and she lost consciousness. The staff at her facility called an ambulance, and we have her here for observation. Amara sank into Nicholas's chair, her legs suddenly weak. How serious is it? We're running tests, but it appears to be a reaction to her new medication. We may need to adjust her treatment plan, which could require a few days in the hospital for monitoring. I'll be right there. Miss Johnson, there's one more thing. The hospital's billing department wanted me to mention that her insurance may not cover the full cost of an extended stay. You might want to speak with them about payment arrangements. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of financial stress settling on her shoulders. Even with her new salary and better insurance, there were always gaps, always unexpected costs that threatened to overwhelm her carefully balanced budget. I understand. Thank you, doctor. She hung up the phone and sat for a moment, trying to collect herself. When she looked up, Nicholas was standing nearby, concern written across his face. Is everything all right? My grandmother is in the hospital. I need to go. Of course. Take as much time as you need. Amara gathered her purse and files, her mind already racing ahead to hospital corridors and medical bills. I'm sorry to leave in the middle of our meeting. We can finish discussing the town halls tomorrow. Amara, wait. She stopped at the door, surprised by his use of her first name. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can help? The offer was so unexpected and sincere that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. For 2 weeks, they had maintained a strictly professional relationship, but something in his voice suggested that her grandmother's health crisis had crossed a line from business into something more personal. Thank you, but there's nothing anyone can do right now. I just need to be with her. Nicholas nodded, but she could see that he wanted to say more. Instead, he simply said, call me if you need anything. Anything at all. As she hurried toward the elevator, Amara realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Nicholas Bennett had stopped being just her boss. He had become someone she could trust, someone who cared about her well-being beyond what she could contribute to his company. And that realization was almost as frightening as it was comforting. What do you think Nicholas will do next to help Amara during this crisis? Will his feelings for her become more obvious? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to follow this developing love story. 20 minutes later, as she sat in the back of a taxi racing toward the hospital, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hospital bills are taken care of. Focus on your grandmother, not the money. Amara stared at the message, her heart hammering in her chest. He had somehow managed to contact the hospital and arrange payment for her grandmother's care before she had even arrived. It was an incredibly generous gesture, but more than that, it showed that he understood exactly what she needed most: the freedom to focus on her family without worrying about the financial consequences. For the first time since Dr. Peterson's call, Amara felt like she could breathe. Whatever was happening between her and Nicholas Bennett, she was beginning to think it might be worth exploring. Eleanor Bennett sat in the elegant dining room of the Chicago club, stirring her tea and watching Amara Johnson across the table with barely concealed delight. Getting the young woman to agree to lunch had been easier than expected. A simple phone call expressing concern about her grandmother's health had been enough to secure the meeting. "How is Dorothy doing?" Eleanor asked, her tone warm and genuinely concerned. "Much better, thank you. The doctors adjusted her medication, and she's responding well to the new treatment plan." Amara seemed nervous, clearly wondering why the mother of her boss had invited her to lunch at one of Chicago's most exclusive private clubs. "I'm so glad to hear that. Nicholas told me about her hospitalization." "He did?" Eleanor didn't miss the slight flush that colored Amara's cheeks at the mention of her son. "Oh yes, he was quite worried about you. He called me that evening asking if I knew anything about managing family medical crises." "That was very thoughtful of him." "Was it?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying Amara's face. "Or was it something more than thoughtfulness?" Amara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, Mrs. Bennett." "Please call me Eleanor. And I think you understand exactly what I'm asking." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The dining room buzzed with quiet conversations among Chicago's elite, the gentle clink of silverware on china providing a peaceful backdrop to their potentially explosive discussion. "Mrs. Bennett?" "Eleanor. I'm not sure this is appropriate." "My dear, very little about this situation is appropriate by conventional standards. My son is a billionaire CEO, and you're an employee who shouted at him in front of his board of directors. If we worried about what was appropriate, we'd never get anywhere interesting." Despite her obvious discomfort, Amara smiled slightly. "You have a point." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice becoming more confidential. "Amara, may I tell you something about my son?" "I suppose." "Nicholas has been focused on business and making money for so long that he's forgotten how to be human. After his father died, he threw himself into running the company with a single-minded determination that was both admirable and terrifying." Amara nodded, clearly remembering the cold, calculating man she had confronted in the boardroom. "But in the past month, since you started working with him on these community programs, I've seen changes in him that I haven't seen in years. He smiles more. He asks about people instead of just profits. He called me last week to ask if I thought a childcare center was a good investment, not because of the financial returns, but because he wanted to know if it would really help working parents. The community programs were always good business sense." "Oh my dear, don't be modest. Those programs exist because you convinced him that taking care of employees was more important than maximizing quarterly profits. Do you have any idea how revolutionary that thinking is for someone like Nicholas?" Amara was quiet for a moment, processing Eleanor's words. "He's not the same man I yelled at 4 weeks ago. No, he's not. He's becoming the man I always hoped he could be. The man his father would have been proud of." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Amara's. "And I think you're the reason why." "Mrs. Bennett?" "Eleanor. Eleanor, I'm just doing my job. I'm helping him implement programs that will benefit the employees and the company. That's what you pay me for." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and knowing. "My dear girl, when was the last time you left the office before 8 p.m.? Amara blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. Well, there's been a lot of work to do with the new programs. Nicholas told me that you've been staying late every night to work on the town hall presentations with him. He also mentioned that you've been bringing him dinner from the cafeteria so he doesn't forget to eat when he's focused on a project. He does tend to skip meals when he's concentrating." "Exactly. You're taking care of him, Amara? That's not in your job description." Amara's cheeks were definitely pink now. "I just want the programs to succeed." "I'm sure you do. But I think there's more to it than that." Eleanor signaled the waiter for more tea, using the pause to let her words sink in. She had been watching Nicholas and Amara for weeks now, studying their interactions through security footage and reports from various employees. What she saw was a relationship that was growing into something much deeper than professional collaboration. "May I ask you a personal question?" Eleanor said when they were alone again. "I suppose. What do you think of my son?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "He's brilliant, driven. He has a vision for what the company could become that's both ambitious and compassionate." "And personally?" "Personally? As a man, not as a boss." Amara looked down at her hands and Eleanor could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. "He's not what I expected," Amara said finally. "When I first started working for him, I thought he was arrogant and cold. But the more time I spend with him, the more I see that he's just been isolated. Surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear instead of what he needs to hear. And now I think he's someone who genuinely wants to do better, to be better. He listens when I challenge him. He asks questions because he really wants to learn, not because he's trying to prove how smart he is." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the tone of a woman who was falling in love but didn't quite realize it yet. "He's lucky to have you in his life. We work well together." "Yes, you do. But I think it's more than work, isn't it?" Amara met Eleanor's eyes directly for the first time since they had started talking about Nicholas. "Mrs. Bennet, what are you really asking me?" "I'm asking if you care about my son as more than just your employer." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Eleanor could see Amara weighing her response, trying to decide how honest she should be. "Yes," Amara said quietly. "I do care about him. More than I probably should." Eleanor's smile was triumphant. "And does he know how you feel?" "Of course not. It would be completely inappropriate. He's my boss and I need this job. I can't risk." "Risk what?" "Risk finding happiness with a man who clearly adores you." "Adores me?" Amara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mrs. Bennet, your son is a billionaire. He could have any woman he wants. Why would he be interested in his employee? Because you're the only woman who's ever looked at him and seen the man instead of the money. Because you challenge him to be better instead of just telling him how wonderful he already is. Because when you smile at him, he lights up like a Christmas tree." Amara stared at her, clearly shocked by the revelation. "You haven't noticed?" Eleanor continued. "The way he finds excuses to stop by your office? The way he asks for your opinion on decisions that have nothing to do with your department? The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching? I thought he was just being friendly." "My dear, Nicholas Bennet doesn't do friendly with employees. He does professional and distant. The fact that he's being anything else with you should tell you something." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through several photos before finding the one she wanted. She turned the screen toward Amara, showing her a picture taken in Nicholas's office the night before. In it, Nicholas and Amara were leaning over a desk looking at documents, their heads close together, both of them smiling about something. "This was taken last night by building security," Eleanor said. "Look at his face, Amara. Look at the way he's looking at you." In the photo, Nicholas's expression was soft and warm, completely different from his usual professional demeanor. He was looking at Amara with something that could only be described as affection, and possibly something deeper. "I had no idea," Amara whispered. "Of course you didn't. You've been too busy trying to maintain professional boundaries to notice that he's been falling in love with you." "Love is a strong word." Eleanor put her phone away and leaned back in her chair. "Amara, I've known my son for 32 years. I've watched him date women who were interested in his money, his status, his connections. I've never seen him look at any of them the way he looks at you in that photograph. But even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I still work for him. There are rules about workplace relationships, especially between executives and their employees. Rules can be changed, policies can be updated, and job descriptions can be rewritten." Eleanor's voice became more serious. "But opportunities for real love don't come along very often, especially for people like Nicholas who are surrounded by fortune hunters and social climbers." Amara was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing everything Eleanor had told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was uncertain. "What exactly are you suggesting I do?" Eleanor smiled, the expression both maternal and slightly mischievous. "I'm suggesting that you stop hiding behind professional propriety and start paying attention to what's happening between you and my son. I'm suggesting that you consider the possibility that the best thing for both of you might be to explore whatever this is that's growing between you. And if it ruins our working relationship? If it damages the programs we've been developing? Then you'll deal with those problems when they arise. But if you let fear keep you from exploring the possibility of happiness, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Eleanor signaled for the check, indicating that their lunch was coming to an end. Amara, may I give you one piece of advice from someone who's been married to a powerful man? Please. The right relationship makes both people stronger. If Nicholas is the right man for you, being with him won't diminish your independence or compromise your principles. It will give you a partner who supports your goals and shares your values. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor placed her hand on Amara's arm. I hope you'll think about what I've said. And I hope you'll give my son a chance to show you how he really feels. Mrs. Bennet? Eleanor? Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you telling me all this? Why do you want us to be together? Eleanor's smile was warm and genuine. Because in 32 years, I've never seen Nicholas as happy as he's been since you entered his life. And because any woman brave enough to yell at my son in a boardroom is exactly the kind of daughter-in-law I've been hoping for. As they walked toward the club's entrance, Eleanor felt satisfied with her afternoon's work. She had planted the seeds. Now it was up to Nicholas and Amara to let them grow. But judging from the thoughtful expression on Amara's face, Eleanor was confident that love would find a way. The town hall meetings had been Nicholas's idea, but as he stood in the employee break room on the 15th floor facing 50 expectant faces, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. These weren't board members or fellow executives. These were people who sorted mail, answered phones, and processed insurance claims. People whose lives had been directly affected by his decisions over the years. Amara stood beside him, calm and composed despite the fact that they were about to present programs that could fundamentally change how the company operated. She had spent the morning reviewing their talking points and had insisted on arriving early to test the presentation equipment herself. Good afternoon, everyone, Nicholas began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I know many of you have questions about the new community outreach programs, and Miss Johnson and I are here to provide answers. A woman in the front row raised her hand immediately. Nicholas recognized her as Patricia Gonzalez from the accounting department, a single mother with 2 young children. Mr. Bennet, is it true that you're planning to open an on-site childcare center? Yes, it is. Nicholas gestured to the presentation screen behind him, which showed architectural plans for the proposed facility. We're planning to convert the unused space on the 3rd floor into a fully licensed childcare center that will serve children from 6 months to 5 years old. A murmur of excitement rippled through the room. Several parents leaned forward in their chairs, clearly interested in the details. The center will be staffed by licensed childcare professionals and will operate from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, Amara added. The cost to employees will be approximately 60% less than comparable private childcare in the area. Patricia raised her hand again. How do we know this isn't just a publicity stunt? How do we know the company won't cancel the program if it gets expensive? It was exactly the kind of question Nicholas had been dreading, but Amara had coached him on how to respond with honesty and transparency. That's a fair question, Patricia, he said, using her name deliberately. 5 weeks ago, I probably would have considered this program an unnecessary expense. But Miss Johnson has shown me research that proves companies with strong employee support programs consistently outperform their competitors in productivity, retention, and innovation. He clicked to the next slide, which showed comparative data from several major corporations. This isn't charity, it's smart business. Taking care of our employees means they can focus on their work instead of worrying about their families. That benefits everyone. A man in the back row stood up. Nicholas recognized him as Tom Williams from the maintenance department, the same Tom that Amara had mentioned during her boardroom outburst. Mr. Bennet, my wife has multiple sclerosis. The new health coverage sounds great, but what happens if her condition gets worse? Are you going to find a way to get rid of me because I become too expensive? The room went quiet. This was the heart of every employee's fear, that they were expendable when they became inconvenient or costly. Nicholas felt Amara's presence beside him, steadying and supportive. Her confidence in him gave him the courage to be completely honest. Tom, I can't promise that your job will exist forever. Markets change, technology evolves, and companies have to adapt to survive. But I can promise you that as long as I'm running this company, no employee will be fired because of their family's medical needs. How can you guarantee that? Because 5 weeks ago, I learned something important about the kind of leader I want to be. Someone in this room had the courage to tell me that I was making decisions that hurt people unnecessarily. She taught me that protecting profits at the expense of people's lives isn't just wrong, it's bad business. Nicholas looked directly at Amara as he spoke, and he saw her eyes widen slightly as she realized he was talking about her. From now on, Every major decision this company makes will be evaluated not just on its financial impact, but on its human cost. We're going to ask ourselves, is this the right thing to do? Will this make our employees' lives better or worse? Will this decision reflect the values we want our company to represent? The room was completely silent now. Nicholas could see employees exchanging glances, clearly surprised by his candor. I know I haven't always been the most approachable boss, he continued. I know that many of you see me as someone who's disconnected from your daily struggles. That's going to change. Miss Johnson is establishing a direct feedback system so that your concerns and suggestions can reach me without going through multiple layers of management. Another hand went up. This time it was Jennifer Martinez from marketing, the single mother Amara had mentioned in her original confrontation. What about the continuing education program? Some of us have been in the same positions for years because we don't have the qualifications for advancement. Amara stepped forward to answer this one. The program will offer courses in everything from computer skills to project management to accounting. Classes will be held here in the building during lunch hours and after work, and the company will cover all costs including textbooks and materials. What if we don't have time for classes because of family obligations? We're also exploring online options and weekend sessions. The goal is to make advancement opportunities available to everyone, regardless of their personal circumstances. Nicholas watched Amara as she fielded questions with patience and expertise. She had a natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel heard and valued. When she talked about the programs, her passion was evident in every word. One more question, he said as their allotted time began to run out. This one is for me personally. A young man in the second row raised his hand tentatively. Mr. Bennett, why should we trust that these changes are permanent? How do we know you won't change your mind when the next quarterly report comes out? It was a crucial question, and Nicholas knew that his answer would determine whether the employees embraced these programs or remained skeptical. Because I've learned that the old way of doing business isn't sustainable, he said. Companies that treat their employees as disposable resources don't last. The businesses that thrive are the ones that understand that their people are their most valuable asset. He paused, looking around the room at faces that were no longer suspicious but genuinely interested. But more than that, I've learned something about the kind of man I want to be. I don't want to be someone who gets rich by making other people's lives harder. I want to build something that my father would have been proud of, something that makes Chicago a better place for everyone who works here. The room broke into spontaneous applause. As employees began filing out, many stopped to thank Nicholas and Amara personally. Patricia Gonzalez shook Nicholas's hand with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. The childcare center will change everything for me and my kids. Tom Williams clapped him on the shoulder. I appreciate what you said about job security. It means more than you know. When the room was finally empty except for Nicholas and Amara, they began packing up their presentation materials in comfortable silence. That went well, Amara said, unplugging her laptop. Better than I expected. You were right about talking to them directly. They needed to hear from you personally. It makes the programs feel real instead of just corporate policy. Nicholas helped her gather the extension cords and presentation remotes, their hands brushing as they reached for the same cable. The brief contact sent an electric shock through his system, and he noticed that Amara pulled her hand back quickly. Amara, he said softly. Yes. Thank you. For all of this. For pushing me to be better, for designing these programs, for believing that change was possible. She looked up at him, and for a moment, the professional distance she usually maintained seemed to disappear. You didn't need me to push you, Nicholas. You just needed someone to remind you of who you really are. The use of his first name, so rare from her lips, made his heart skip a beat. They were standing close together in the empty break room, surrounded by the lingering energy of a successful presentation and the growing awareness of something deeper developing between them. Who am I really? He asked, genuinely curious about her answer. You're someone who cares more than he wants to admit. Someone who spent so long protecting himself from disappointment that he forgot how good it feels to hope. Her words hit him with unexpected force. In the 6 weeks since she had confronted him in the boardroom, she had seen through every wall he had built around himself. You make me want to be better than I am, he admitted. You already are better than you think. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Nicholas found himself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the warmth in her dark eyes and the sincerity in her voice. Amara, I need to tell you something. Before he could continue, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, then looked back at him with obvious regret. I'm sorry, but I need to check on my grandmother. The nurse is changing her medication schedule and I promised to call. Of course. Go. As she gathered her things and headed for the door, Nicholas felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. He had been about to cross a line that could change everything between them, and he wasn't sure either of them was ready for that yet. But as he watched her hurry toward the elevator, her heels clicking on the polished floor, he realized that his feelings for Amara Johnson had grown far beyond professional respect or even friendship. He was falling in love with her, and that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. That evening, Nicholas found himself staying late in his office, not because he had work to do, but because going home to his empty penthouse seemed unbearable. He was staring out at the city lights when he heard a soft knock on his door. "Come in." Amara appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the employee cafeteria. She had changed out of her presentation clothes into jeans and a sweater, and her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual professional style. "I thought you might want some coffee," she said, approaching his desk. "You looked like you were planning to work late again. You didn't have to come back." I wanted to finish our conversation from earlier." She set 1 cup in front of him and kept the other, settling into the chair across from his desk. The casual gesture seemed to shrink the vast office, making the space feel intimate and personal. "How's your grandmother?" "Good. The new medication schedule is working well. She was actually asking about you." "About me?" Amara smiled. She wanted to know if my boss was still the nice young man who paid for her hospital bills. Nicholas felt warmth spread through his chest. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you're more complicated than I initially thought, but that underneath all the corporate executive facade, you're a good man who's trying to do the right thing." "And what do you think?" "Not what you told her, but what you really think." Amara was quiet for a moment, cupping her coffee mug in both hands and looking out at the city skyline. "I think you're someone who's been hurt and disappointed enough times that you learn to keep people at a distance. I think you use your wealth and power as a shield to protect yourself from getting too close to anyone." Her insight was so accurate that it took his breath away. "But I also think," she continued, "that you're lonely, and that all the money and success in the world can't fill the space where real connection should be." Nicholas set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See right through me. I've spent years perfecting the image of the cold, calculating billionaire, and you see past it like it doesn't even exist. Maybe because I wasn't looking for the billionaire when I met you. I was looking for the human being." The conversation was veering into dangerous territory, but Nicholas found himself unable to stop. "What did you find?" "Someone worth knowing. Someone worth caring about." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge directly. "Amara," Nicholas said carefully, "what's happening between us?" She met his eyes directly, and he could see her own uncertainty reflected there. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know it's more than just professional. I know that I look forward to our meetings more than I should. I know that when you smile at me, it feels like the most important thing that's happened all day." Nicholas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "And that scares you?" "Terrifies me. You're my boss, Nicholas. You have the power to change my entire life with a single decision. What happens if this goes wrong? What happens to my job, my grandmother's care, everything I've worked for? What happens if it goes right?" The question surprised both of them. Nicholas hadn't planned to ask it, but once the words were out, he realized it was the most important question either of them could answer. "I don't know," Amara whispered. "I've never been in a situation like this before." "Neither have I." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of their mutual attraction and the complexity of their situation settling between them like a third presence in the room. "I should go," Amara said finally. "It's getting late." "Stay." The word came out before Nicholas could stop it, raw and honest and completely vulnerable. "Nicholas, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I don't want to be alone tonight. I don't want to go back to my empty apartment and pretend that this conversation didn't happen." Amara studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her weighing the risks and possibilities. "What are you asking for?" "Dinner. Conversation. A few more hours of not having to be the billionaire CEO who has all the answers." "Just dinner?" "Just dinner. And the chance to get to know you better, not as my employee, but as the woman who's been changing my life without even realizing it." Amara's smile was soft and uncertain, but it was a yes. "Okay. But not here, and not somewhere where we'll be seen by half of Chicago's business community. I know a place." An hour later, they were sitting in a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, far from the corporate towers and exclusive establishments where Nicholas usually dined. The restaurant was family-owned, warm and unpretentious, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of genuine atmosphere that money couldn't buy. "How did you find this place?" Amara asked, looking around at the framed family photos and handwritten menu boards. "My father brought me here when I was 12. It was one of the last times we had dinner together, just the two of us before he got sick." The admission was more personal than anything he had shared with another person in years. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was. He built the company, but he never forgot where he came from. He grew up poor, worked his way through college, married my mother when they were both struggling to make ends meet." "You miss him?" "Every day. Especially lately when I'm making decisions about the company. I keep wondering what he would do, how he would handle things differently." Amara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple and comforting, but it sent electricity shooting through his entire body. "I think he would be proud of the changes you're making. The community programs, the way you talk to the employees today. That's the kind of leadership that cares about people, not just profits." "You really think so?" "I know so." They talked through dinner about everything and nothing. Her college years, his travels, her grandmother's stories about teaching elementary school, his memories of learning the business from his father. For the first time in years, Nicholas felt like he was having a real conversation with someone who saw him as just Nicholas, not Nicholas Bennett the billionaire. When they finally left the restaurant, it was nearly midnight. Nicholas offered to drive her home, but she insisted on taking a taxi. "This was nice," she said as they waited for her cab to arrive. "It was. But we need to be careful, Nicholas. What's happening between us? It's complicated." "I know. I don't want to lose my job. And I don't want you to do something you'll regret because you're feeling isolated and vulnerable." Nicholas took her hands in his, marveling at how small and warm they felt. "Amara, whatever this is between us, it's not because I'm lonely or making poor decisions. It's because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and being with you makes me want to be the man I was always supposed to become." Before she could respond, her taxi arrived. As she got into the back seat, she rolled down the window. "Nicholas?" "Yes. Thank you for dinner. And for letting me see who you really are." As the taxi pulled away, Nicholas stood on the sidewalk watching the taillights disappear into Chicago traffic. For the first time in his adult life he was falling in love, and it was both the most wonderful and the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him. Tomorrow they would go back to being boss and employee, maintaining professional boundaries and pretending that tonight had never happened. But something fundamental had shifted between them, and Nicholas knew that there was no going back to the way things were before. The only question now was whether they would have the courage to move forward together, or whether fear would keep them from exploring the possibility of something extraordinary. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Nicholas from a restless sleep. He had been dreaming about Amara, about the dinner they had shared the week before and the way she had looked at him when she said goodbye. Their relationship had become increasingly complicated, dancing around feelings neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge while trying to maintain professional boundaries that seemed more fragile each day. "Mr. Bennett?" The voice belonged to Rebecca Chin, his corporate attorney, and she sounded more stressed than he had ever heard her. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "We have a serious problem. Hartwell Industries just announced they're pulling out of the merger. Effective immediately." Nicholas sat up in bed, instantly alert. The Hartwell merger was the largest deal his company had ever attempted, worth nearly $3 billion. It was supposed to cement their position as the dominant force in Chicago's commercial real estate market. What reason did they give? "They claim they've discovered irregularities in our financial reporting. They're citing due diligence concerns and demanding a full audit before they'll consider proceeding." Nicholas was already getting out of bed, his mind racing through the implications. What kind of irregularities? That's the problem. We don't know. Their letter is deliberately vague, but they're threatening to go public with their concerns if we don't agree to their terms for ending the merger. Which are complete access to our books, a $50 million penalty payment, and the right to inspect all our properties over the next 6 months. Nicholas felt his stomach drop. $50 million was manageable, but giving Hartwell unlimited access to their operations would expose every aspect of their business to their biggest competitor. "They want to destroy us," he said. "That's my assessment. This isn't about due diligence. This is corporate warfare." By 7 a.m., Nicholas was in his office, surrounded by stacks of financial reports and legal documents. Thomas Mitchell, the CFO, looked like he hadn't slept, and Rebecca was pacing the floor with her phone constantly buzzing with calls from lawyers and accountants. What's our exposure if this goes public? Nicholas asked. Significant, Thomas replied grimly. Our stock price will crater, other partners will get nervous, and we'll be facing lawsuits from investors who think we've been hiding something. Are we hiding anything? Nothing illegal, but you know how these things work. Any company our size has transactions that can be made to look suspicious if you present them the right way. Nicholas rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a massive headache. 3 months ago, this crisis would have consumed him completely. He would have worked 18-hour days, sacrificed everything and everyone to save the deal, and emerged victorious but more isolated than ever. But now, all he could think about was Amara's voice telling him that some things were more important than profit margins. What are our options? Rebecca stopped pacing and consulted her notes. We can fight them publicly, challenge their claims and force them to prove their allegations. We can negotiate, try to reduce the penalty payment and limit their access to our records. Or we can walk away completely and focus on damage control. What do you recommend? Fight. We're not guilty of anything, and giving in to their demands sets a precedent that any competitor can derail our deals with baseless accusations. Thomas nodded in agreement. A public fight will be expensive and risky, but it's better than being seen as weak or guilty. Nicholas stared out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the 800 employees whose jobs he had saved just 2 months ago. If this crisis destroyed the company, all of his recent changes would be meaningless. The community programs, the employee benefits, the new culture of caring about people over profits, all of it would disappear. Schedule an emergency board meeting for this afternoon, he said finally. And get me everything we have on Hartwell's leadership team. If they want a war, we need to understand who we're fighting. By noon, the crisis had deepened. Word of the Hartwell situation had leaked to the financial press, and their stock price had dropped 12% in morning trading. Nicholas's phone was ringing constantly with calls from board members, investors, and business partners, all demanding explanations. He was reviewing crisis management strategies when Amara knocked on his door. Come in. She entered carrying a cup of coffee and a sandwich from the cafeteria, setting both on his desk with the quiet efficiency that had become so familiar and comforting. You missed lunch, she said simply. I'm not hungry. When was the last time you ate anything? Nicholas tried to remember and realized it had been some time the day before. I don't know. Amara sat down across from his desk, and he could see the concern in her dark eyes. Over the past month, she had become attuned to his moods and stress levels in a way that was both professional and deeply personal. Talk to me, she said. What's happening? For a moment, Nicholas considered giving her the corporate line about market fluctuations and business challenges. But the events of the past few hours had stripped away his usual defenses, and he found himself telling her everything. The Hartwell merger is falling apart. They're accusing us of financial irregularities and threatening to destroy our reputation if we don't pay them $50 million and give them access to all our business records. Amara listened without interrupting, asking clarifying questions and taking notes as he explained the complexities of the situation. Do you think their accusations have any merit? She asked when he finished. No. But in business, perception is often more important than reality. If they can make us look guilty, it doesn't matter whether we actually did anything wrong. What does the board want to do? Fight. Publicly challenge their claims and force them to prove their case. And what do you want to do? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of Nicholas's internal struggle. What he wanted to do and what his board expected him to do were two very different things. I want to protect our employees, he said honestly. I want to make sure that whatever happens, the people who work here don't suffer because of corporate politics and ego battles. Amara leaned forward slightly. So what's stopping you? If we don't fight this, if we're seen as weak or guilty, it could destroy the company anyway. Sometimes you have to take big risks to protect what matters most. Or sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to stay true to your principles. Her words echoed conversations they had been having for months about leadership, values, and the cost of success. But now, facing the biggest crisis of his career, Nicholas realized that all their philosophical discussions were about to be tested in the real world. What would you do? He asked. Amara was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications of her answer. I'd ask myself what kind of company I want to run and what kind of leader I want to be. Do you want to be someone who fights dirty because that's how business is done, or do you want to be someone who finds a different way? What if there is no different way? What if fighting dirty is the only option? Then you have to decide whether winning is worth compromising everything you've been working to build. Before Nicholas could respond, his intercom buzzed. Patricia's voice was tense and urgent. Mr. Bennett, I have Eleanor Bennett on line 1. She says it's important. Nicholas looked at Amara apologetically. I should take this. Of course. I'll be in my office if you need me. As she left, Nicholas picked up the phone, grateful for his mother's impeccable timing and terrible timing in equal measure. Mother. Nicholas, I just heard about the Hartwell situation. How bad is it? Bad. Potentially catastrophic. What are you planning to do? Nicholas found himself repeating the same conversation he had just had with Amara, explaining the legal and financial implications of each possible response. And what does Amara think you should do? Eleanor asked when he finished. The question surprised him. How did you know I talked to her about it? Because she's the only person you trust enough to be completely honest with, and you're too smart to make a decision this important without getting her perspective. Nicholas sighed, recognizing the truth in his mother's assessment. She thinks I need to decide what kind of leader I want to be. Smart woman. What kind of leader do you want to be? The kind my father would have been proud of. Then you already know what to do. After hanging up with his mother, Nicholas sat alone in his office, staring at the stack of legal documents and financial projections that represented 2 years of work on the Hartwell deal. 6 months ago, losing this merger would have felt like a personal failure. But now, facing the possibility of a prolonged legal battle that could damage his employees and tarnish the company's reputation, he realized that some victories came at too high a price. He picked up the phone and called Rebecca Chin. Rebecca, I want you to set up a meeting with Hartwell's attorneys. We're going to negotiate. Nicholas, are you sure? The board is expecting us to fight this. The board expects me to make the best decision for the company. Sometimes that means knowing when to walk away from a fight that can't be won cleanly. What are you planning to offer them? Whatever it takes to end this quietly and protect our employees and reputation. The merger isn't worth destroying everything we've built. That afternoon's board meeting was one of the most difficult of Nicholas's career. Thomas Mitchell argued passionately for fighting Hartwell's accusations, pointing to financial projections that showed the company's long-term growth potential with the merger. Rebecca presented legal strategies for discrediting Hartwell's claims and forcing them into a public relations battle. But Nicholas found himself thinking about Amara's words, about the kind of leader he wanted to be and the kind of company he wanted to run. The merger is cancelled, he announced after listening to 2 hours of arguments. We're going to negotiate a settlement with Hartwell that minimizes the financial damage and allows both companies to move forward without a public battle. The room erupted in protests and arguments, but Nicholas held firm. As the board members filed out, clearly unhappy with his decision, he wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. But when he returned to his office and found Amara waiting with a fresh cup of coffee and a supportive smile, he realized that for the first time in years, he had made a decision based on his values rather than his fears. How did it go? She asked. I think I just cost the company $3 billion and possibly my job. But you did the right thing. How can you be so sure? Amara stood up and moved to stand beside his chair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The touch was both comforting and electric, a reminder of the feelings that had been growing between them despite all the professional complications. Because you chose to protect your employees and your principles over a deal that would have compromised both. That's exactly the kind of leader this company needs. As Nicholas looked up at her, seeing the confidence and affection in her eyes, he realized that regardless of what happened with Hartwell or the board or the financial consequences of his decision, he had gained something far more valuable than any business deal. He had found someone who believed in him not because of his wealth or power, but because of the man he was choosing to become. And that was worth more than all the mergers in the world. Eleanor Bennett had been watching the developments between her son and Amara Johnson with the patience of a master chess player, and the Hartwell crisis had provided her with the perfect opportunity to make her final move. 3 days after Nicholas had announced his decision to settle with Hartwell rather than fight, Eleanor invited Amara to lunch at her penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The invitation had come as a surprise to Amara, who was still processing the emotional aftermath of the business crisis. She had watched Nicholas make a decision that could have destroyed his career, choosing principle over profit in a way that would have been unthinkable just 3 months earlier. The man who had once been willing to lay off 800 employees to improve quarterly numbers had walked away from a $3 billion deal rather than compromise his values. Eleanor's apartment was elegant but warm, filled with family photographs and personal mementos that spoke of a life lived fully. As they sat on the terrace overlooking the lake, Eleanor poured tea from a delicate china service and studied Amara with intelligent blue eyes. "You look tired, dear," Eleanor observed. "It's been a challenging week," Amara replied diplomatically. "For all of us. I imagine Nicholas has been impossible to work with." Despite everything, Amara smiled. "Actually, he's been remarkably calm. Focused but not frantic like I expected." Eleanor's eyebrows rose with interest. "Really? In the past, business crises have turned him into an absolute tyrant. He once made 3 assistants quit in a single week during a merger negotiation." "He's changed?" "Yes, he has. The question is why?" Amara set down her teacup, recognizing the leading nature of Eleanor's comment. "Mrs. Bennet, if you have something you want to say to me, please just say it directly." Eleanor's laugh was delighted. "I do appreciate your straightforward approach. Very well, let's dispense with subtlety." She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. "Amara, my son is in love with you." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. She had suspected, had hoped, had feared the same thing, but hearing it stated so directly by Nicholas's mother made it impossible to ignore or rationalize away. "Mrs. Bennet?" "Eleanor. And before you tell me that's impossible or inappropriate or any of the other objections I'm sure you're forming, let me explain why I'm certain." Eleanor reached for a folder that had been sitting on the table beside her chair. "These are reports from the past 3 months. Security footage, employee observations, even accounts from the building's custodial staff." She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. "This is from the night you worked late on the community center proposals." The security guard noted that Nicholas stayed in the office until nearly midnight, something he hasn't done since his father died unless there was a genuine emergency. The next photo showed Nicholas and Amara in his office, leaning over documents with their heads close together. "This is from last Tuesday. According to the timestamp, this was taken at 8:30 p.m. What were you working on that required you both to stay so late?" Amara looked at the photo, remembering the evening clearly. They had been reviewing budget projections for the employee education program, but the conversation had gradually shifted to more personal topics. Nicholas had talked about his father's expectations and his own fears of not living up to the legacy he had inherited. "We were discussing the education program." "For 4 hours?" "We got distracted by other topics." Eleanor's smile was knowing. "I'm sure you did." "Here's another interesting observation. Nicholas has started asking Patricia to order lunch for 2 every day, claiming he has meetings scheduled. But according to his calendar, the only person he sees during lunch hours is you." Amara felt heat rising in her cheeks. It was true that Nicholas had been inviting her to share meals more frequently, usually under the pretense of discussing work projects. But their conversations had become increasingly personal, ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future. "We've been collaborating closely on several initiatives." "Amara, dear, you can't possibly believe that I'm fooled by the professional explanations. I've been watching Nicholas navigate the corporate world for 15 years. I know the difference between business relationships and personal ones." Eleanor pulled out another document. "This is a report from his personal shopper. 3 weeks ago, Nicholas asked her to research the best assisted living facilities in Chicago, specifically ones that specialize in diabetes and heart disease management." Amara's breath caught. "What?" "He's been investigating options for your grandmother. Facilities that would provide better care than her current arrangement, with full medical support and rehabilitation services." That's not possible. Those facilities cost thousands of dollars a month." "Yes, they do." "Which is why he also asked his financial advisor to set up a trust fund specifically designated for long-term care expenses." Amara stared at Eleanor, trying to process what she was hearing. "He never mentioned any of this to me." "Of course not. He knows you would never accept such an arrangement if he offered it directly. Your pride would force you to refuse, even if it meant better care for your grandmother. So he's planning to trick me into accepting his charity?" Eleanor's expression became gentle but firm. "He's planning to love you the way you deserve to be loved. By taking care of the people who matter to you, by supporting your dreams and goals, and by removing the financial stress that has been controlling your life since your parents died." Amara stood up and walked to the terrace railing, looking out at the lake while she struggled to control her emotions. "This is too much. It's too complicated. Love usually is. Mrs. Bennet, even if what you're saying is true, even if Nicholas has feelings for me, it doesn't change the fundamental problems. He's my boss. He has power over every aspect of my career. What happens if things go wrong between us personally? What happens to my job, to the programs we've developed, to everything I've worked for? Eleanor joined her at the railing, her voice warm and understanding. Those are legitimate concerns and I won't minimize them. But let me ask you something. What happens if you let fear prevent you from exploring the possibility of happiness? I survive. I keep my job, I take care of my grandmother, and I don't risk everything on something that might not work out. And you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching boats move across the lake and couples walking along the shoreline paths below. May I tell you about Nicholas's father? Eleanor asked eventually. Please. Robert Bennett was a lot like you, actually. He came from nothing, worked his way through college, and was absolutely terrified of getting involved with someone from a wealthy family. When I first met him, he was convinced that my parents would never accept him and that I would eventually realize I was too good for him. What changed his mind? I did. I told him that love isn't about matching bank accounts or social status. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. Someone who challenges you and supports you and believes in your potential even when you don't believe in it yourself. Eleanor turned to face Amara directly. Robert made me a better person and I did the same for him. Together, we built something that was stronger than either of us could have created alone. And you think Nicholas and I could have that? I think you already do. You've changed him, Amara. In 3 months, you've helped him become the kind of leader I always hoped he could be. He's more compassionate, more thoughtful, more connected to the human impact of his decisions. And what about me? What do I get out of this besides financial security? Eleanor's smile was radiant. You get a partner who adores you, who values your intelligence and integrity, who will support your goals and dreams without trying to diminish or control you. You get someone who sees your strength and independence as assets to be celebrated, not obstacles to be overcome. How can you be so sure? Because I've watched him with other women over the years. He's dated heiresses and models and socialites, women who were perfectly lovely but completely forgettable. He never looked at any of them the way he looks at you. How does he look at me? Like you're the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. Like you're home. The words hit Amara with unexpected force, bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly wiped away. I'm scared, she admitted. Of course you are. Love is terrifying, especially when it has the power to change everything about your life. But you're one of the bravest women I've ever met, Amara. You stood up to my son when no one else would. You risked your career to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. Surely you have enough courage left to take a chance on happiness. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. I have something for you. Amara unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a key. It belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor explained. She gave it to me when I married Robert and she told me that love was the key to everything worth having in life. I've been saving it for the woman who would be right for Nicholas. Mrs. Bennett, I can't accept this. Eleanor. And yes you can. Because whether you're ready to admit it or not, you're already part of this family. You're the woman my son loves, the person who's helped him become the man his father wanted him to be. Amara held the necklace with trembling hands, feeling the weight of Eleanor's expectations and hopes. What if I hurt him? What if I'm not good enough for this life for him? Eleanor's expression became fierce with maternal protectiveness. Amara Johnson, you listen to me. You are a brilliant, principled, caring woman who has overcome obstacles that would have destroyed someone with less strength. You are exactly what my son needs and frankly, he's lucky that you're even considering giving him a chance. But the differences between us are superficial. Money, social status, background, those things don't matter when two people truly understand and support each other. What matters is that you share the same values, that you make each other laugh, that you can imagine building a life together. Eleanor helped Amara fasten the necklace, the small key resting just above her heart. I want you to think about something, Eleanor said. 3 months ago, Nicholas was a man who measured success purely in financial terms. Today he walked away from a $3 billion deal because it conflicted with his principles. That transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because someone he cares about showed him there was a better way to live. You're giving me too much credit. I'm giving you exactly the credit you deserve. You've been the catalyst for every positive change in his life, and he knows it. The question is whether you're brave enough to see where this leads. As they finished lunch and prepared to leave, Eleanor took Amara's hands in hers. I have one last thing to tell you, and I want you to listen carefully. Okay. Tomorrow night, Nicholas is having dinner with the board of directors. They're going to ask for his resignation because of the Hartwell decision. He doesn't know yet, but I've heard from several sources that they've already identified his replacement. Amara felt her heart sink. They're firing him? They're going to try. Whether they succeed depends partly on his ability to defend his decisions and partly on whether he has the support he needs to weather the storm. What kind of support? Eleanor's smile was meaningful. The kind that comes from knowing someone believes in you completely, someone who loves you for who you are rather than what you've accomplished. You want me to tell him how I feel. I want you to give him a reason to fight for the life he's building instead of simply accepting defeat and walking away. As Amara left Eleanor's apartment, her mind was spinning with everything she had learned. The necklace felt warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of the choice she was facing. She could continue hiding behind professional boundaries and miss the chance for something extraordinary, or she could take the terrifying leap of trusting her heart. That evening she found herself standing outside Nicholas's penthouse building, having made a decision that surprised even her. The doorman recognized her from previous business deliveries and waved her through without question. Nicholas answered his door in jeans and a sweater, his hair disheveled and his eyes tired. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Amara? What are you doing here? I talked to your mother today. Nicholas's expression became guarded. What did she tell you? Everything. About the trust fund for my grandmother, about the board meeting tomorrow night, about how you've been feeling. Amara, I can explain. Can I come in? He stepped aside, and she entered the vast penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive modern furniture. But what struck her most was how empty it felt, how little of Nicholas's personality was reflected in the sterile perfection of his living space. You didn't need to come here, Nicholas said, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected visit. Whatever my mother told you, I don't want you to feel obligated. Stop. The single word cut through his nervous rambling. Amara turned to face him directly, drawing courage from the small key resting against her heart. Nicholas, do you remember what you asked me the other night? About what would happen if this went right? Yes. I've been thinking about that question ever since. And I realized that I've been so focused on protecting myself from what could go wrong that I've been missing what's already going right. Nicholas took a step closer, hope and wariness battling in his expression. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere between yelling at you in that boardroom and watching you choose principles over profit this week, I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest and completely transformative. Amara? I love the way you listen when I challenge you instead of getting defensive. I love how you've learned to care about our employees as people instead of just resources. I love that you're brave enough to change even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Nicholas closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her face. I've been in love with you since the day you told me I was heartless and selfish. You were right, and you cared enough to tell me the truth even when it could have destroyed you. Your mother thinks we could build something together. What do you think? Amara smiled, feeling the last of her resistance melting away. I think I'm tired of being afraid of happiness. When Nicholas kissed her, it was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as they both realized that they were finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. When they broke apart, Amara could see tears in his eyes. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. Tomorrow night, the board is going to try to force me out, and I don't know what happens after that. Then we'll figure it out together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a team. Even if it means I'm no longer a billionaire CEO? Even if I lose everything? Amara laughed, the sound bright and joyful. Nicholas, don't you understand? The man I fell in love with isn't the billionaire. He's the person who canceled 800 layoffs because someone told him it was the right thing to do. He's the man who walked away from $3 billion rather than compromise his values. And if I lose my job? Then you'll find something else to do, something that uses your talents and intelligence to make the world better. And I'll be right there with you, supporting you and challenging you and loving you every step of the way. Nicholas pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. I love you, Amara Johnson. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the future holds, I want to build it with you. I love you too, Nicholas Bennett. Now let's figure out how to save your company. As they sat together on his couch, planning strategy for the board meeting and talking about their future, Amara realized that Eleanor had been right about everything. Love wasn't about matching bank accounts or social status. It was about finding someone who made you braver, stronger, and more yourself than you had ever been alone. And as Nicholas's arms tightened around her, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The boardroom had never felt more hostile to Nicholas as he walked in for what could be his final meeting as CEO. The 12 members of the board sat around the polished mahogany table like judges preparing to deliver a verdict, their faces carefully neutral but their intentions clear. Thomas Mitchell avoided eye contact entirely, while Rebecca Chin shuffled papers with nervous energy. But as Nicholas took his seat at the head of the table, he felt calmer than he had in years. The night with Amara had changed everything. Knowing that someone loved him for who he was rather than what he owned had given him a clarity and confidence that no amount of wealth or power ever could. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, "I understand you have concerns about my recent decisions regarding the Hartwell merger." Richard Blackstone, the board's chairman and a man who had known Nicholas since childhood, leaned forward with a grave expression. "Nicholas, we've been friends for a long time, so I'm going to be direct. Your decision to settle with Hartwell rather than fight their accusations has cost this company $3 billion and made us look weak to every competitor in the market. I understand your position. Do you? Because from where we sit it looks like you've lost your edge. The Nicholas Bennett we know would have crushed Hartwell publicly and made them pay for challenging us." Nicholas stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline he had helped shape over the past 8 years. "You're right," he said quietly. "The old Nicholas Bennett would have fought that battle without considering the cost to our employees or our reputation. He would have prioritized winning over doing what was right." "And what's wrong with that?" demanded Margaret Thornton, a board member who represented the pension fund investors. "Winning is what we pay you to do." Nicholas turned back to face the room, and for the first time since the meeting began he smiled. "Because I've learned something over the past few months that I should have understood years ago. A company that sacrifices its values to win battles will eventually lose the war." He returned to his seat and opened the folder he had brought with him. "I want to show you something before you make any final decisions about my leadership." He distributed copies of a report to each board member. "These are employee satisfaction scores from the past 3 months, compared to the same period last year." Richard glanced at the numbers and frowned. "Satisfaction is up 38%. How is that possible?" "The community programs that Amara Johnson designed and implemented. The direct feedback system that allows employees to communicate with management without fear of retaliation. The commitment to treating our workforce as valuable human beings rather than disposable resources. Those programs cost money," Thomas Mitchell pointed out. "Money that doesn't show up as profit on our quarterly reports." "You're right. But look at the next page." Nicholas watched as the board members turned to the productivity and retention statistics. Productivity is up 22%. Employee turnover is down by half. Sick days and worker compensation claims have decreased significantly. We're attracting better talent because word is spreading that this is a company that takes care of its people. Margaret Thornton looked up from the report. "These numbers are impressive, but they don't change the fact that you walked away from the biggest deal in company history." "Actually they do." Nicholas pulled out another document. "This morning I received a call from Davidson Properties. They want to discuss a merger that would be worth $4.5 billion. The room went completely silent. "Davidson has been watching how we've handled the Hartwell situation," Nicholas continued. "They were impressed that we chose to protect our reputation and values rather than fight a public battle that could have damaged both companies. They see that as the kind of principled leadership they want in a partner." Richard Blackstone set down his copy of the report and leaned back in his chair. "You're saying that walking away from Hartwell actually attracted a better offer?" "I'm saying that sometimes doing the right thing has consequences that go beyond immediate profit and loss. Davidson Properties has been looking for a merger partner for 2 years, but they've been waiting for a company with leadership they could trust. And they trust us because we settled with Hartwell instead of fighting? They trust us because we demonstrated that we're more interested in building something sustainable than in winning at any cost." The board members began murmuring among themselves, clearly processing this unexpected development. Nicholas could see the doubt in their expressions being replaced by cautious interest. "There's something else," he said. "The settlement with Hartwell included a non-disclosure agreement that prevents them from discussing their accusations publicly. As far as the market is concerned, both companies simply decided that the merger wasn't the right fit. Our reputation is intact, and we're free to pursue other opportunities." Thomas Mitchell looked up from his notes. "What about the $50 million settlement payment?" "Davidson Properties is willing to cover it as part of their merger proposal. They see it as a small price to pay for acquiring a company with a reputation for ethical leadership." Nicholas stood up again, feeling the energy in the room shifting from hostility to intrigue. "Ladies and gentlemen, 3 months ago I was running this company the way I thought a successful CEO should. I prioritized profits over people, competition over collaboration, and winning over doing what was right. I was successful by traditional measurements, but I was building something hollow and ultimately unsustainable. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. Today we have higher employee satisfaction, better productivity, stronger community relationships, and a potential merger that's worth $1.5 billion more than the deal I walked away from. We achieved all of this by choosing to be better rather than just trying to be bigger. The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than hostile. Richard Blackstone consulted his notes for several minutes before speaking. Nicholas, these results are impressive. But how do we know this approach will work long-term? How do we know you won't make more decisions that seem to prioritize idealism over pragmatism? It was the question Nicholas had been expecting, and he had an answer that came from the deepest part of his heart. Because I've learned that taking care of our employees and maintaining our integrity isn't idealism. It's the smartest business strategy we could possibly adopt. Companies that treat their people well consistently outperform companies that don't. Companies with strong ethical reputations attract better partners, better talent, and more loyal customers. And who taught you this? Margaret Thornton asked with a slight smile. Someone who cared enough to tell me the truth when I needed to hear it, even though it could have cost her everything. The board voted unanimously to retain Nicholas as CEO and to authorize negotiations with Davidson Properties. As the meeting ended and board members filed out with expressions of relief and renewed confidence, Richard Blackstone stayed behind. That was well done, Nicholas. But I have to ask, what really changed your mind about how to run this company? Nicholas smiled, thinking about Amara waiting in her office for news about the meeting. I fell in love with someone who showed me that being powerful doesn't have to mean being ruthless. She taught me that the best leaders are the ones who lift other people up instead of stepping on them to reach the top. This someone wouldn't happen to be Amara Johnson, would it? How did you know? Richard's laugh was warm and knowing. Because she's the only person in this building brave enough to change your mind about anything, and because you get a completely different look on your face when you talk about her. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been watching you try to figure out how to balance business and personal happiness for the past few months. As Nicholas left the boardroom, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had not only saved his job and his company, but he had done it by staying true to the values that Amara had helped him discover. For the first time in his adult life, his professional success and his personal integrity were completely aligned. He found Amara in her office, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline with an expression of nervous concentration. When she heard him enter, she turned around with hope and fear warring in her dark eyes. How did it go? Instead of answering, Nicholas crossed the room, took her in his arms, and kissed her with all the joy and relief and love that was overflowing from his heart. Does that answer your question? He asked when they broke apart. I take it the board meeting went well? Better than well. They renewed their confidence in my leadership, and we have a new merger opportunity that's worth $4.5 billion. Amara's smile was radiant. So everything worked out? Everything worked out because I had someone who believed in me enough to help me become the kind of leader worth following. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Amara's eyes widened with shock and delight. Amara Johnson, you changed my life from the moment you walked into that boardroom and told me I was wrong. You've made me a better man, a better leader, and a better human being. I can't imagine facing the future without you. He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring that was elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but not overwhelming. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in business and in life? Will you help me build something extraordinary together? Amara's answer came through tears of joy. Yes. Yes to all of it. Yes to everything. As Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, Amara realized that Eleanor had been right about love being the key to everything worth having. She had found a man who valued her intelligence and independence, who supported her dreams and shared her values, who made her braver and stronger and more herself than she had ever been alone. 6 months later, their wedding was held in the employee cafeteria of Bennett Industries, transformed into an elegant reception hall with flowers and lights and the warmth of hundreds of people who had watched their love story unfold. The guest list included board members and janitors, executives and administrative assistants, all celebrating the union of two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. Eleanor Bennett gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, speaking about love as the foundation of all meaningful success. Dorothy Johnson, Amara's grandmother, danced with Nicholas and whispered that she had never seen her granddaughter so happy. As the evening wound down and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Amara pulled Nicholas aside for a quiet moment. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Changing the way you run the company, choosing principles over profits, all of it? Nicholas looked around the room at their employees celebrating, at his mother laughing with Amara's grandmother, at the evidence of a community built on respect and caring. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to find you. You didn't just change how I run the company, Amara. You changed how I see everything. And I love you for letting me. I love you for never giving up on the possibility that I could be better. As they drove away from their wedding reception, heading toward a future filled with challenges and opportunities they would face together, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started as an angry employee confronting an arrogant billionaire, but she had discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell someone the truth about who they really are. And sometimes if you're very lucky they listen. The story that had begun with shouting in a boardroom had ended with promises whispered in a wedding ceremony, proving that love really could transform everything it touched. Nicholas Bennett had found someone who loved him for his heart rather than his bank account, and Amara Johnson had found someone who saw her strength and intelligence as gifts to be treasured. Together, they had built something that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. A love that would last a lifetime, a company that truly cared about its people, and a future filled with the kind of happiness that money could never buy. In the end, the woman who had yelled at the billionaire had become the woman he could not live without. And the billionaire who had once measured success only in dollars had learned that the greatest wealth of all was finding someone to share it with. Their love story had transformed them both, and in doing so had transformed everyone whose lives they touched. It was a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected confrontations can lead to the most extraordinary connections, and that love, when it's real and true and brave, has the power to change everything. As they began their new life together, Nicholas and Amara carried with them the knowledge that they had found something precious and rare. A partnership built on trust, respect, and the kind of deep affection that makes every challenge worth facing and every success worth celebrating. The billionaire had found his heart, and the woman who had awakened it had found her home. And they lived, as all the best love stories promise, happily ever after.